Hello and welcome to this video. On this video, we're going to be replacing this Delta faucet with a Moen. That's a different style. It comes up. I'll show you that in a minute. The reason we're replacing it is because this Delta faucet was made in China. It's a pretty reasonably good quality product. It's the single arm type faucet that you turn it on, and the cartridge in here controls hot and cold by moving it left and right. The problem is when you turn it on, it puts water pressure into this assembly here, and it tends to start leaking after a period of time. There's an upper and lower O-ring inside of this assembly that moves. And we have very, very hard water here in Phoenix, or in the Phoenix area. And because of that, and the fact that we don't have a softener, over time, hard water deposits ruin these O-rings and make this start leaking. And this one's been leaking down and behind and causing some bacterial growth. So we're gonna pull the whole thing out. Now this has an escutcheon on it, but on this type of sink, it actually is a single hole sink. But before you order any faucet, you want to see if it's a single hole or a 3-hole. And there's also an industrial version that has the holes even further apart. So you'll need to check the hole spacing. So having said that, I'm going to show you the Moen. This is the Moen faucet we're going to use to replace the Delta. Now this faucet is made in the USA, and you can order an optional escutcheon component that goes underneath. So if you have a 3-hole sink, it'll cover up the 3 holes. But again, in our case, we have a single hole sink, so this should work fine. Now what's great about this design is the water mix controller is here on this handle, and that's going to control your hot and cold water. And what it does is takes the hot and cold water supply coming in, mixes them here, and then puts them into the faucet part here. And as you can see, there's no water or O-rings in here. This whole assembly just swings back and forth, so it should never leak, and it should be an awesome thing. Very easy to install. Also includes what we call PEC tubing, where the tubing's already on the component, and all you're going to do is attach them to your hot and cold water source. Before you get started, you want to turn your water off to your house. It's always a good idea, especially if you live in a hard water area. And also, you're going to want to open some faucets to drain the water pressure out. And you might want to have a couple of these valves handy, because these tend to go bad very quickly, especially in hard water areas. So you're going to need a couple of valves similar to this, sized for this application, and that's always a good thing to have. Now, you may have these under your sink now, but if they don't turn real easy, they're likely to snap. So that means that your water has corroded the fitting, or it's full of calcium deposits. So also, I have some of this compound here that I like to put onto these, what I'm going to call compression fittings, before I tighten them up, and it helps prevent any small leaks. Normally you don't need that, especially if you're in a soft water area, but again, in a hard water area, you get all this crusty calcium stuff, and even if you clean it off really well, it's really hard to make a good seal. So this kit includes the tools to install it, all the parts you need. Everything's in here, so in just a moment we'll turn off the water and get started. All right, so before we shut off the water and disconnect the hoses to the faucet, what I've done right now is I've taken these nuts loose that hold the faucet down. Turns out it's a 3-hole sink, so we will be installing the optional escutcheon on the new faucet. So I took these loose, pulled up the sink faucet very carefully, there's plenty of hose, and tried not to scratch any of the ceramics. And then I took a razor blade and carefully scraped underneath where the calcium deposits are under the escutcheon, the old one, and got a lot of that off and vacuumed it up. And then now I've put some paper towels down with some CLR. Now CLR used to contain phosphoric acid, and they took it out, so it doesn't really work that well anymore, but we're going to give it a shot and see if it'll clear or remove the calcium deposits. If that doesn't work, then we'll move to some just good old vinegar to see if it can dissolve the deposits. If that doesn't work, then we're going to use some dilute phosphoric acid. And then hopefully we'll have all the deposits off by then and be ready to move to the next step, which will be to shut off the water, open several sinks to release the water pressure, and then disconnect the lines from this and start to install the new one. So always wear gloves and protective eyewear when you're working around anything like CLR, acetic acid, or vinegar, and our phosphoric acid. You don't want to get it in your eyes. At this point, what we've done is used CLR to clean the lime off the sink, and it came off quite easily. I followed it up with wet wipes, and then I used some Windex to finally clean it. I have the water turned off to the house now, and I've opened up the spigots so that the water pressure will relieve. And I'm getting ready to take off the hoses that feed this faucet. And they basically come off of a valve like this, but since we have hard water, we generally don't turn these valves on and off because they tend to break real easily and they tend to leak. So you're going to use a 5/8 inch wrench to take this nut off. And actually there'll be a hose coming in here on yours. And I'll show you that here in a second in more detail. But what you want to do is you want to take like a crescent wrench and you want to back this up so it doesn't get bent or move at all or anything, because it'll start leaking very easily. So what you want to do again is back this up, take this loose with the hose attached, and I'll show you that again, like I said, just a second. But you want to be really careful that you don't bend or flex any of this stuff, because this stuff breaks really easily, especially with it going to copper pipe. This will be going into a piece of copper pipe. So with that said, I'll open up the underneath the sink and we'll show you where that area is, and we'll start taking the hoses loose. The first hose we're going to take loose is the hot water hose. It's this one here. This goes up to the faucet, and this one goes to the dishwasher. So that's the way you know it's hot water. And generally in America, left side over here is hot water, the right side is cold water. So I've actually already put the backing wrench on here and loosened this up. So I'm just going to take this hose off. I have a tray underneath because water is going to come out a little bit. So I'm going to take this one loose, then I'm going to do the cold water side, and then we'll pull the whole sink out. I'll show you that here in the whole faucet out. I'll show you that in just a second. I removed the old faucet. You'll notice on this style here, it has two copper tubes that lead to the flexible tubes that go onto the valves themselves. And you'll notice they're offset, and that's so that you can feed it through the hole where it comes up through the sink or goes down through the sink. And that's why that's made that way. So this is just going to go in the recycle bin. We're done with it. I'm going to show you how to prep the new faucet here in just a second. I'm ready to install the new faucet, and I'm going to use the escutcheon plate since we have a 3-hole sink. If you only have a 1-hole sink, you're going to put this gasket on the faucet itself, and it's located by some pins, you'll see. And so if you're not going to have a 1-hole and you're going to have a 3-hole, and so you're going to use this escutcheon plate, then you're not going to use that gasket. So basically it's going to fit on something like this. All 4 of these hoses are going to go through the plate. And then once you put it in, underneath the sink, you're going to put this so these flanges are facing upwards. You're going to put this special washer on, and it's going to go where these hoses are. And then you're going to use a special nut that comes with it. And this nut's like this. It's like a plastic nut. And you're going to snug it up real good using this tool. Then you're going to come back in and put in this other nut and just hand tighten it. So we're going to get that put together, and we'll come back and see what's next. Okay, so now we have everything put together. It's been assembled per the instructions. The water works perfectly, hot and cold. And that's all fine, and we'll show you a view from underneath. Also, I wanted to say when I put the hoses on, I did put a little bit of this pipe sealant on just the thread area. That's because we're in a hard water area, and it does tend to get a lot of lime deposits, and they tend to weep. So to keep them from weeping, I found just to put just a tiny bit of this on the threads, and it keeps it from happening. So what we're doing now is we've turned the water on, of course, and everything's connected. We're going to show you underneath. And then in about an hour or so, we'll recheck it to make sure there's no leaks. And then if that's the case, we're finished. And that's all there is to this video once we show you underneath. Hold on a second. One final note is the hot water side is marked with a label. That's on the hose has a label on it, so you'll know that's hot. And so again, you can see how I've connected them. And so there seems to be no leaks, so we're all finished. Thanks for watching.